Let's kick it off. Thanks for coming in first thing in the morning after the party. Appreciate that. In October 1990, I finished my last exam in engineering, and my degrees are not in software engineering. They happen to be in civil engineering, and my specialties were in construction and transport engineering. So I spent a lot of time thinking about highways. I spent a lot of time less time thinking about footpaths, but this is the sort of stuff that I learned how to design and build. And I spent a bunch of time looking at plans like this. My plans actually were usually not in imperial measurements, so I just found a picture with imperial, so don't worry too much about that. But we spent a lot of time thinking about how to build stuff. What we didn't spend so much time thinking about was where should things go? And it's a really interesting question, particularly when you're talking about things like roads and, more importantly, things like footpaths. How do you decide where a footpath goes? So, a really interesting story. Recently, one of the major Illinois universities moved campuses. And for a year, they didn't put any footpaths in. They built all their buildings, they didn't put any footpaths in. And at the end of that year, they had something that looked a bit like this. So now they knew where to put the footpaths. By the way, if you want to go down a real rabbit hole, there's a subreddit called Desire Path. It only has pictures of these. So, and it's fascinating. Like, there's some really interesting stuff going on there. Everywhere from the tiniest little shortcut around a corner through to stuff across the middle of football fields and all sorts of things. And a really lovely set of pictures of Delft University in the Netherlands, where they did this as well. I didn't want to pinch those photos because they weren't Creative Commons, but look them up. They're definitely worth having a look at. But this idea of people deciding where things should go, as opposed to engineers deciding what should happen, is a really interesting concept. And we'll talk a bit more about that as we go. So my name's Andrew Coates. I am a software engineer at Microsoft. I've been at Microsoft now for a bit over 18 years. And before that, as I said, I was a civil engineering student. I didn't actually ever work in civil engineering. It's an interesting story about how I got into software. Catch me over a beer sometime. But my job is to think about how we can help our biggest customers solve their most difficult problems with code. I've been a software engineer for a long time now. The thing that I really love doing, though, is make sure that their customers are making use of all of their resources. And that doesn't mean just software engineers. We have lots and lots of technical people in many organizations who are quite capable of using tools that are that we can provide them to come up with really creative and interesting and, most importantly, relevant solutions. And we know they're relevant because they're using them every day. Now, up until now, well, recently, we've had things like Access and Excel, and those have lived under people's desks, and we haven't really had any control over them as software engineers or as the IT infrastructure people, have we? But what we can do is we can start basically building a team of the engineers, the software engineers, the professional developers, the IT and security people, and also the people who are what I'd like to call makers, the people who are actually doing a bunch of this stuff, and provide them with tools that really give them an interesting set of opportunities and give us as an organisation a real opportunity to grow and to take advantage of that. So let's talk about some of the people who might be a part of a Fusion team. Let's talk about professional developers. I like to put us as who would consider himself a professional developer in this room? Professional software developer. Yeah, I would think that most people in this room would probably do that. We're at a professional software developers conference. So, I talk about a good developer having two major attributes. They should be boastful and they should be lazy. I think those two things are really important in a developer. Now, I'm going to just define what those two things mean a little bit. When I talk about lazy, I talk about as a developer, I'd much rather you spend 6 hours on a generic data import routine than 2 hours doing data entry. Yeah, as a software developer, to me, that's a really good use of my time. I learn a bunch of things and so on, but I also don't feel like I've just done 2 hours of data entry. I can concentrate on the important things as a software developer. I can build that massive infrastructure at the back end. I can have event hubs, and I can have large data repositories. I can build workflows and all kinds of things that are mission critical and enterprise ready and all those kinds of things. What I really don't want to be spending a lot of time doing is putting together the tiny little thing that the accounting department needs to do this thing with that little bit of data that comes out of our system. What I'd like to be able to do is provide them with access to that bit of data that comes out of our system and the tools that give them the capabilities to do that. But I don't want them to take that data and do something else with it, like put it under their desk. What I really want them to be able to do is enhance my data estate, or our data estate, by working on it. So I give them APIs, I give them infrastructure, I give them guidance. And what's more, every once in a while, one of those makers comes up with such a good idea that we hadn't thought of that we need to bring it in-house and make it available to everyone in the business. So we need to adopt and enhance the things that they find and that they do. And we need to be able to discover those things in some way. So we need to be able to monitor what's going on. So we can do that too. Now, of course, our friends in the IT and security departments are also pretty aware of the sort of things that could happen if you just let the general population in the organisation at the data, at the systems. They want to make sure that there's no way they can leak. So you can't accidentally publish, for example, all of your customer records out onto some open web API. You can't expose all of the salary information for the company, all those sorts of things. So you need some sort of guide rails in place so that that Jason from accounting doesn't accidentally automatically send the wrong emails through some sort of automation process to the wrong people. So you need some sort of guidance in place. You need to have access policies. You need to monitor what's going on. But you also need, as an infrastructure IT department, to provide things where you're not the bottleneck. You need to have tools in place where your makers can self-service, where they can decide that they want to experiment, that they've got a place where they can go and, without having to go through a whole lot of bureaucracy, spin up a new instance of whatever it is they want to do and make it available and trial it. So that's really important. And as software engineers, we really, really want to make sure that when people build software, they're doing it in a way that makes sense from an engineering point of view. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily that every single software project has got to be a fully fledged project that the way we would normally do it in our systems. But we do want some things in place. We want to be able to control the source. We want to be able to deploy reliably and repeatably. We want to be able to be able to roll back and look at the way things have worked. This is all really important stuff. And as a maker, what do we bring to the party? Well, we've got a bunch of business knowledge. The people who know the business best are the ones who are actually in the business. As an engineer, we're really good at providing the large infrastructure pieces, the pieces that make sense broadly. And I go back to my civil engineering analogy. As a civil engineer, one of the things I'll do is make sure that there's water coming into a brand new block of a brand new development and sewage going back out of it again. I'll make sure that there's that water gets connected all the way up to the pipes at the edge of the property, and then the plumbers will come in and put plumbing in, and they'll plumb in things like hose fittings and taps and toilets and all that kind of stuff. And then the end user, that is the property owner, will come in and they'll decide what they're going to do with it. Are they going to install a cappuccino machine or maybe a hydroponics plant? It doesn't matter, right? They're the ones who know what their business requirement is, so we provide them the infrastructure to do that, and they get to use it. And they get to plug into it. And that's what that's the way these things work. And the other key thing in here is that we all know that as our businesses grow, and as we are more and more reliant on the data that we generate and the data that we consume, the access to that data and the enhancement of that data are key parts of any business. And if we provide, as a software engineering profession, access to and ways of safely adding to the data, then our end users will take that and everything they build will enhance our data estate. They will use the data that they've got and they will put more data in. And that means that the value of our data estate grows and grows and grows. Far more perhaps than we would if it was just us trying to do that. So I guess the things that, the three key things about a Fusion team are we want to be able to automate the process, we want to be able to analyse the output, and we want to make sure that people can collaborate across the entire organisation. As I said, let's just look at some of the things that you get out of doing Fusion development. So we're talking before about before the session about how many developers there aren't. So there's a bunch of different estimates going around. The last one I saw, that we're about 5 million developers short around the world, and we're not producing nearly that many at any one time. And the demand is growing much faster than the supply. So what do? Well, the big thing we can do is we can take advantage of those really clever technical people, the engineers, the geologists, the accountants, all of those sorts of people, the scientists who actually have great technical knowledge but don't necessarily have a background in software engineering, and we let them build some of their own tools. And they're going to build their tools to do the things they want to do because they're the experts in that domain. We encourage people to innovate. So we have that concept of the desired paths that I was talking about before, where if we give people tools and access to the data, they will come up with things that we didn't necessarily come up with. And they won't all be good ideas. And that's okay, because we haven't spent a lot of time building that particular solution. It's quite okay to fail a number of times, or just have the very specific applications that are written for one tiny little thing. But every once in a while, someone will develop something that has a generic value across the entire organisation, and we can identify that and magnify its impact across the organisation. But it only came about because the Fusion team or the makers came up with it first. And as I said before, we get a chance to really enhance the data estate. As professional developers, we free up our resources. I don't know how many times working in small organisations or even large organisations, I've had requests for a change to the field on Form 73B, please. Yeah? Which means I've basically got to stop what I'm doing, alter all my context, do this thing, get it all put. It might take a week to do this thing. And that means I'm not working on the new API that we're building, or the great new web e-commerce site, or whatever it happens to be that I'm building. So if we give people the ability to do that themselves, that's fantastic. And we get to work on the things that matter on a large scale. Now, when I say work on what matters, I think it's really important to emphasise that the stuff that the makers do matter. But when I'm talking about working on what matters for pro devs, I'm talking about being able to build the stuff, the infrastructure that allows the business to run and allows the makers to do their thing. And of course, as makers, not only do they feel like they are they feel like they're masters of their own destiny. They feel like they've got the capability of doing things that they want to do. They don't have to raise that request for that field to get changed. They don't need to raise a request to get some email address changed or some workflow approval to change. They can just do that. And if they've got a system that allows them to reliably deploy that and test it and so on, that's even better. So let's talk about how you might do that. Here's the first low-code I worked in. This is Fortran. It was a huge step forward in terms of low-code compared with what the options were at that stage. Yeah? And then here's some next of the low-code I worked in. I didn't have to worry about anything around memory management or all kinds of stuff. I could just drag and drop things. I could double-click on a thing and it would go to the right place. It was amazing. Yeah, that was low-code. And now when we talk about low-code, we're talking about things like this. We're talking about workflows and being able to compose pieces. I think the important piece here is that low-code, the definition of low-code is changing and changing fast. Constantly anyway, I don't know about fast, but it's changing constantly. Low-code is at this moment, is really about composition and about the ability to quickly create a user interface, for example, or a workflow. Low-code later on might be something more about being able to describe in natural language what you want to happen for that to get converted somehow into the solution you're after. It might be something around literally assembling things in 3D space through some sort of augmented or virtual reality. Who knows what low code is going to look like in the future? The thing is that we keep abstracting away from the ones and zeros further and further. And that means that more and more people can get access to the things that they, in a way that makes sense to them. So this is what low code's all about. And the reason we do low code is really that there's kind of two ends to our software spectrum. We can buy stuff off the shelf and not write any code at all. And at the other end, we can all sit around and bang out some really neat, high performance code. Somewhere in the middle, though, there's not enough people to do this, and these things on the right, the out-of-the-box software, the software as a service, or the package solutions, don't necessarily do everything you want to do. So somewhere in the middle, there's an opportunity that we miss out on because we don't have enough of the professional developers to do all custom app development, and that's what low-code can help us with. Now, it's really important to remember that low-code doesn't equal low engineering. Engineering is a really important part of what we do with low-code if we want to do it on a sensible scale. And as we know, it's possible to build systems without any engineering at all, regardless of the stack. Right-click deploy, anybody? You know, it's a lovely demo, but it's not engineering, right? But we want to make sure that systems that are built with any stack use some sort of engineering fundamentals. We want to think about source control and continuous integration to deployment. We want to think about being able to co-develop. We want to think about testing, all that kind of stuff. So we're going to talk a bit about that in the context of some Microsoft tools. All right. I'm going to talk about, as I said, about Microsoft tools for low-code, and that's particularly because that's what I'm familiar with. There are a number of others as well. And so although I'm talking specifically about Microsoft low-code tools today, I don't want you to think that's the only option. I'd love you to think it's the first option. You know, that's my job. But I don't want you to think it's the only option. So although I'm speaking specifically now about some of the tools that we've got available, both commercially and through open source, I would like you to think about whether the low-code tools that you're using, whatever they happen to be, might fit into these. So the particular low-code tools I'm going to talk about around the Microsoft Power Platform. Has anyone used any of these tools? Yeah? Has anyone written anything in Excel? Yeah, a few people have opened Excel. Yeah. Written the formula, maybe. Yep. That's a low-code tool. There are a bunch of others. These tools here, this Power Platform tools, are a really interesting and powerful way of making very competent software available to people who aren't necessarily software engineers, but usually people who at least understand some of the technical requirements. Everywhere from people who are automating workflows. So we have a part of our business internally that strangely enough, we use Azure DevOps for a lot of things, including tracking a bunch of our engagements, not just at the source code level, but at the sort of almost at a CRM level, which is a bit strange, but that's kind of when you're an engineering organisation, every tool looks like a hammer or something, something like that anyway. But one of the things that happens in there is that we store a bunch of documentation as as attachments on work items in Azure DevOps. And one of our business process managers really didn't like the fact that we weren't actually version controlling any of these documents because that's not how that works when you attach attachments to work items. And they wanted to pull every time there was an attachment added, they wanted to pull it out and put it somewhere to version control. And SharePoint was their best way. Now, they asked our tools team to write them something that would allow them to pull that stuff out, and our tools team said, sorry, we're busy. Haven't got any time. So we, in my team, helped this particular person write a Power Automate flow that runs an Azure DevOps query. They were great at Azure DevOps queries. That was great. Looks for anything with an attachment and pulls that attachment out. For each of the projects that it finds an attachment for, it creates a folder in a SharePoint list. And for each attachment on each work item, it just puts it in that folder. Now, if they were to do that manually, A, they wouldn't, because that's a real pain. And B, it would take them a very long time, and they'd probably get it wrong, 1 in 10 somehow. They put it in the wrong folder or whatever it happens to be. We've now been able to allow them to automate that. They've now got a process for doing this particular thing. They've added value to the business, and they didn't have to go off to the IT department or the tools area to get this thing done. It also means that the business is significantly enhanced in its capability, and that particular flow has now gone from being just run by that one PM to across our business. So we've identified that thing. We've enhanced it. We've put a bunch of additional capabilities around it. We've parameterized a lot of things, and we've taken that requirement that we didn't even know about, and we've made it available to everybody. So this is a real win for everybody. So each of these little components, so Power Apps, I'll do a quick spiel on these things. Power Apps allow you to quickly create a UI that is connected to a bunch of different data sources and display it in a way that is available to the is easy to use for the end users. Oh, so the other thing I didn't mention about that little automation routine is that all of the governance that we have in place around SharePoint and Azure DevOps and all the other things are automatically part of that automation routine because the governance was already in place. We have guardrails, so for these people who are building this system, they can't go off and just get anything. They can only get things they normally have access to. They can't publish it just anywhere. They only can publish it in the places they normally have access to. And so all of that data governance is in place. Power Automate allows us to run a series of steps with a bunch of branching capabilities. If you haven't seen these things, Todd Whitehead this afternoon is doing a great session on how to use some of these tools. Yeah, there you are. Later on today, I think at 4, the one just before the final, second last, yeah, just before Richard Campbell talks about flying to space in 2020 or something. 2040, whatever it is. Power BI, great reporting tool. Power Virtual Agents allow you to quickly create intelligent bots or virtual agents that respond to natural language and can call any of the other pieces. And Power Pages is the evolution of what used to be the portals, Power Apps portals. These are all built on top of some really interesting pieces. So Dataverse is a database that allows us to define schemas and so on like any other database, but it's designed specifically to work with these other tools. The data connectors piece, I think, is probably the most interesting thing because that allows us to connect to pretty much anything. And the connectors allow us to bring in or send out to a whole bunch of other services normally through a REST API of some sort. And the cool thing for us as developers is that we can build pieces in this data connector space that enable these other power tools to be used by our end users. Now, the problem with all this is that lots of these tools, in fact, all of these, were originally kind of designed to be standalone and they weren't really designed to be used by engineers. They were conceptually thought of at least as end user tools. And so there were a number of things that weren't included. And Richard Campbell talked a bit about this in the keynote, if anyone heard that on Wednesday morning. He said, we don't kind of get things like source control and, all of the other buildings, blah, blah, blah. That's not completely true anymore, but it used to be that was the case. Now, more recently, we've got this idea of bundling the components of an application up into what we call a solution, just like we do in Visual Studio. We have this idea of a solution which kind of collects all the components. And given that, what we can do is this is the Power Platform version of a solution where it's got a whole bunch of different things in it, including, as you can see up here, apps and chatbots and cloud flows and all sorts of things. Now, the nice thing about this is bringing them all into one place means that we have a way of understanding those things all make up our way of solving this particular problem. I'm trying to avoid saying the word solution or application because both of those things are terms that we use actually for things in this. But the solution collects all of the components like it does in Visual Studio or in lots of other places. Don't worry too much about what the bits are in here, and Todd's going to talk a lot more about these things in his session this afternoon about how these things work. But this particular solution has got a number of components. So what we need to be able to do is take those components, and this is the sort of thing that we get our end users to build. We want to take those components, we want to be able to, for example, put them into source control. So what I'd love to do is show you how we can do that. I'm going to show you, to start off with, using a CLI. All right. No, let's try this. That worked before. There we go. Hey. And we might just go back to... All right, visible, beautiful, always tough to know what it's going to be like on this. So, what I've got here is Visual Studio Code. Anyone use Visual Studio Code? Oh yeah, a few. I thought that might be the case. That's awesome. And as a professional developer, I love Visual Studio Code. And I've got installed on there a really nice extension called the Power Platform. Lots of things, but the Power Platform extension. And this gives me a number of things. It gives me the ability to go and connect off to a Power Platform environment. It gives me the ability to grab a solution and pull it down. It gives me the ability to do all sorts of stuff. So let's see some of the capabilities. The first thing it does is it allows me to connect to a number of different Power Platform tenants or organizations. We should probably quit that, shouldn't we? Should have done that early. Excellent. And you can see up here I've got different authorization profiles. The first one is my test environment, and the second one is my Microsoft environment. I'm not going to connect to the Microsoft one because A, because I have many environments in there, it takes a long time to load, and B, because who knows what's in there, so let's leave that alone. But I have a demo environment, and the demo environment has got a number of solutions. It's got, in fact, my organization's got a number of environments that I've got access to, and one in this particular case is a number. And that environment has got a number of solutions in it, in fact, 3. So if we duck across to here, you'll see that I've actually got these environments. I've got this environment, the Contoso and the Andrew Coates environment. And my solutions, I've got a number of them. But it looks like I've got more than 3. But you'll see here that these there are only 3 that say they're not managed. Now, solutions in Power Platform come in 2 types. They have a managed solution, which is basically a sealed binary that allows you to do things but doesn't allow you to edit. And then the unmanaged solutions, which are essentially editable and changeable inside an environment. And the reason that we only saw 3 environments here is because that are unmanaged. Now, of course, as developers, we all like CLIs, so I can actually, which is the Power Automate CLI auth list. And what we'll see there is that I've got two connections, which are the 2 that are up here. So you can see that Visual Studio Code is just just calling this thing, and then I can say, given the one that I've got currently as default, which is the one with the star here, I can say pack solution list, and it'll give me those 3 solutions. And actually go off into the cloud and pick those up, and there are the 3. Sorry, there are the 3 there. No, am I in the environment? Where's the accelerator one? Gone. All right. So, what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you how we can grab this essentially set of binary tools. And so if I were to go back to my Power App solution, I could grab this sample and I could export it. And what would happen is that it would spit out a zip file that I could send somewhere else. And it's a zip file. It's a mechanism that was built. A mechanism that was built by as sort of a stopgap measure, so you basically do some ALM on these things. But what we really want to be able to do is look at the source of it. So I'm going to go into the CLI and say I'm going to create a directory cd. We'll spell correctly, and I won't put a space in test export. There we go. And I'll go in here. And now I'm going to go and grab that file. So I can pack export. And what's going to happen now is I'm going to pull things down. Now, I'm doing all this manually at the moment. I'm going to show you in a minute why we don't have to, but I want you to see the sort of thing you can do. -n ALM, what is it called? ALM accelerator sample solution. and I'm going to put it in the I'm going to put it in a file called testout.zip. Let's just goes off and connects, grabs that solution. Let's have a look what's in that solution while it does. Just take a moment or two. When we go in here and have a look and see what's in here, there are slowly connecting a couple of apps, and the apps are of two different types. There's a Canvas app and a model-driven app. Again, don't worry too much about the details of what those things are. We've got some automation flows. Interestingly, we've got some things called connection references, which allow us to decide that in this environment we want to connect to one instance of a connector. In a different environment, we connect to a different instance of that connector with different parameters. Very, very important to be able to do that. We've got a custom connector, which is one that we've written that allows us to connect to a server somewhere else, security roles, and we've got a couple of tables we defined, and the tables, of course, have got things like the columns that are defined for that table and relationships. Our export succeeded. If I look and see what's in that folder, we have this, which has got some stuff in there. Now, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 folders and some XML files. That's great. The Canvas apps folder is interesting, but it's got basically still hasn't got the source file in here. It's got a binary file. This MS app file is a binary file. So what we need to do is expand this out a little bit further, and of course we can do that because we have a command line tool to do that. So we say pack solution unpack, and then we're going to specify the zip file and the folder. All right, and then we're going to make sure that we process the Canvas apps as well. Now, processing those Canvas apps is part of this same step. Is something that's only just been released as part of the Pack CLI. It used to be another step you had to take with a separate tool. They've now integrated it back in, which is why they've got it as a separate flag, so you can still do it the old legacy way if you want to. And what this is going to do is just going to open that zip file and push some stuff out. So if I now, yes, we'll open. You can see what we've got here is a bunch of, remember if we had 4 folders in the zip file, we've actually got a lot more than 4 folders in our unpacked version. But the ones you'll recognize are things like the workflows and the Canvas apps. And the Canvas app still has that MS app file in there, this one. But it also has an expanded version of it, which is the source. And interestingly, if I look at the source of this particular file, this is just a bunch of YAML. And so now, what used to be a binary file is now exposed as text. And of course, the great thing about that is I can now do this. And now I have a Git repository with all of the source in it. And I can make changes. And I could make changes in a couple of ways. One way I could make a change is I could make a change in the IDE that I showed in the web thing I showed you before, and then re-import it. And that would just overwrite things, and Git's smart enough to know that things that haven't changed won't get updated. Things that have changed, I'll get a diff for. Or I can go over here into my other, let's go here into the solution XML, and we're at version 1 at the moment. Our tiny version is 1. So let's make that 2. I'll save that. I can even commit it. I haven't published it externally, but I could, of course. And now I can come back here and go, pack, solution, pack, instead of unpack, which is what I did before, minus Z. Sorry, this is just going all over the place. Thank you. Go away. Minus Z, and the zip file, of course, was, let's just do it in / test in, because last one was test out, .zip, and the folder is / unpacked. And we're going to, again, process the canvas. And what's happening now is those changes that I've made in a high-code environment are getting packaged back up into my solution so they can get deployed back into the low-code environment. And of course, I could do that by giving the pack solution import command, or I can even go in here, go back to my solutions, back to my solution, and I want to import a solution which I can browse for. Oh, you've lost the screen, sorry. Not sure why we lost the screen. Thank you. We're back? Fantastic, sorry. How far have we got before we lost the screen? I can go back here, I can say, out of here, cancel this. Back into my, yes, I'm going to close the panel. Back into, I'm going to say, import solution. I'm going to browse for the solution, which is in my testin.zip, and next. And it's going to tell me, it's going to read that in, and it's going to say, oh, well, this already exists, this solution already exists, but you've updated the version, you're getting a new version, do you want to update it? See, we've gone from version 1 to version 2. And so you can see how closely linked these things are. It's pretty neat. All right. So that is, yeah. That is the fact that I just wanted to show you could do all this manually. Mm-hmm. No, it doesn't want to do that either, right? Just one more time. One more time. And hang on, Sam, we're coming. Beautiful. All right. So, of course, what you want to be able to do is have a decent branching strategy. And can you imagine trying to explain this branching strategy to a set of low-code developers? Probably not. It's not the easiest thing in the world. Fortunately, we have a bunch of tools. Azure DevOps has given us pipelines, and we have a bunch of Power Platform capabilities in our Azure DevOps pipelines that allow us to go and get the source. We can go and do all those things I did manually with the extraction and the export and the extraction and the putting into Git. All of that can be done as Azure DevOps steps. And we can deploy things in the same sort of way. And ideally what we'd like to be able to do is say, well, when a developer decides that, when a developer updates, they do a commit, they want to be able to do this commit automatically, it needs to be put into the repo. When it gets committed, it should build, and when it builds, it should deploy to some sort of validation area to make sure that the build works. When we're ready to do a commit from the first branch, our dev branch into our feature branch, then that should automatically trigger a build to go, once the PR's been, it should automatically trigger a PR. Once the PR's been approved, it should go into, get deployed into test. Once that's worked and the test has happened, we raise another PR to go from the feature branch into prod, and then that PR, when that gets approved, should deploy to prod. That's the process we like to use as engineers, right? That makes a bunch of sense. Try explaining that to your end user developers as well. However, the nice thing is that there is a tool that does all this stuff for us. It's called the ALM Accelerator for Power Platform. And it is a series of Power Platform tools itself that orchestrate this process and make it really, I'm not going to say easy, but it makes it really possible for a competent low-code developer to adopt these practices. All right. I've got a link to this obviously in the resources, but this is a great way of doing things. Basically, it allows each of the people in a team to have their own developer environment. It has an environment that does a common dev environment that people sort of check into, essentially, and then a series of pipelines that allow us to deploy automatically into these various downstream environments, validation, test, and prod. And I don't want to read any of these, the text to you, but I just wanted to show you that there is a tool that allows us to automate this process. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play a couple of videos, rather than watch, because pipelines take a long time to run, rather than watch those things happen in real time. There's a couple of videos here which explain some of the capabilities around this tool. So, two videos here, about 5 minutes or so each, and there's a couple of things I want you to watch out for in them. The first one is that the tools they're showing are all built in Power Apps, or their Power Platform tools, and they front end a quite complex and really robust process for doing software engineering. But they hide away a lot of that complexity. But they don't hide away so much that it's not usable. They say that, that lovely saying is that things should be as simple as possible, but no simpler. And that's a really important piece. So they may look a little bit complex in this case, but what we're going to see here is a couple of examples of two views of the same tool, depending on whether the user is an advanced maker or a professional developer, or a low-code developer.
Welcome, makers. In this video, I want to introduce you to the ALM Accelerator for Power Platform Maker experience. As you can see in the screen, the first time you open the application, it will ask you to choose the maker environment you want to be working on. The next time you open the application, it will actually remember the last environment you were working on and not prompt you again to choose one. Once you have chosen your environment, the first thing you're going to see on the screen is a list of all the unmanaged solutions that are present within this environment. There are quite some things that we can do with the ALM Accelerator for each of these solutions. But as you can see, some of the options appear grayed out, and that's because the first thing that we need to do is associate our solution to a solution profile. In this demo, I'm going to be utilizing the ALM Accelerator sample solution. The first thing that I want to do is hit this choose a profile link here, which will bring out side pane that will allow me.
I just want to quickly jump in here. This is going to look quite complicated, what he's doing here, and it's not the sort of thing you would expect a maker to do. He's showing you that it is possible, but there are ways of automating this as well to hide this away from the makers.
To choose one of the profiles that I have access to. Within this side pane, I can see the different profiles that I have been given access to associate to the solution that I'm working on. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and choose the ALM Accelerator sample solution, and automatically the tool is going to show me which organization, project, and repository my solution will be linked into DevOps. It will also show me the different deployment environments that are configured against the profile, which I would be able to deploy my solution into. So I'm going to hit save, and I'm going to save these changes. Now, as you can see, my solution is associated to the ALM Accelerator sample solution profile. Choosing the solution profile has made these two links below the solution name active. The first one will allow you to open the solution in the maker experience in case you want to keep customizing the solution. And the second one will allow you to configure the deployment settings, which we will talk a bit more when we are actually deploying the solution. So let's first talk about the saving of the solution. When you're working on the Power Platform creating components in your solution, you normally iterate over the process of creating those components, saving them, and publish them. Now, don't get confused with the save solution button that you can see here. What this save solution button does is it basically pushes your changes into the repository that is part of the solution profile that you have assigned to the solution before. Let's now hit the save solution to bring out the side pane to start pushing our changes to source control. We can see here the profile that we've chosen before, and here we have a text box where we can introduce some of the notes that are going to be used in the commit. We now hit prepare button. And what you're seeing here is basically the ALM Accelerator starting to analyze the solution, all of its dependencies and components, to allow us to configure the deployment settings for each of these. Now, we can...
Oops. I didn't want to actually go forward there, but I will just stop it there, because one of the things that you'll see there is it's going to, again, start looking quite complicated. But this is something that only needs to happen once and can be automated as well. So this is a demo of the capabilities of the system. Lots of the stuff you'll see there, you'll see, I actually might go to the next video in a sec anyway, but lots of the stuff you'll see in this next video, it looks like it's going to be the same screen. It actually is the same application, but because a different persona or a different person is using the application, we light up different parts of the tool. We make things available that you can't change as a maker. So when you saw them take the solution profile at the start there, one of the things you saw was that they chose a solution profile, but they didn't get a chance to alter any of the things inside that. They were all grayed out. They didn't get a chance to alter which environment things were going to and so on. But as an advanced maker, you get a chance to do all that stuff. And so what we might do is show you what it looks like, the same tool looks like with, from the point of view of the advanced maker.
In this video, I want to introduce you to the Advanced Maker experience for the ALM Accelerator for Power Platform. The first time you open the application, you will be asked to select the maker environment in which you want to be working on. Don't worry, the next time you open the application, you will actually remember the last environment you were working on and open that one directly. Let's choose, in my case, Contoso COE New Dev. Once your environment has been opened, you will get a list of all the unmanaged solutions that exist within this environment that you can work with. The first thing you want to do is assign a profile to the solution that you want to be working on. Do realize in this list there are solutions that have a solution profile already assigned to them, which allows you to use all the functionality of the accelerator, although some of them don't. So let's go ahead and choose a profile for this solution. Solution profiles allow us to do a couple of things. First of all, it associates a solution to a given organization, project, and repository within DevOps. And it also specifies and dictates which environments the solution can be deployed into. Notice your administrator has pre-created some solution profiles for you and giving you access to them to use them. Although as an advanced maker, you can also go ahead and create new ones if needed. I am going to choose this COE Starter Kit profile. This profile would associate my solution to this organization, project, and repository, and it would also allow me to deploy into these environments here. Let me hit save to associate this profile with my solution. Once the solution is associated to the profile, the two links below the solution name will become active. The first one is a quick link to open your solution within the Solution Explorer to perform changes to it. And the second one is to configure the deployment settings. We will talk a bit more about deployment settings when talking about committing the solution. You can get to the same screen from both places. The commit solution functionality allows you to save the changes that you've done in your solution to the repository that you have associated through the selected profile. When committing a solution, you will be able to enter the notes for these changes, which would be used as the commit message within the repository. As an advanced maker, you're also able to choose whether you want to create a new branch, providing the name and which other branch you want to base that creation on, or simply choosing an existing branch in the repository. For this example, I'm going to enter a test message for my commit, and I'm going to be pushing these changes to an existing branch. Next thing I'll do is I'll press this prepare button, and this is going to basically take me to a screen where I will be able to configure the deployment settings for my solution. The tool is basically right now analyzing the different components that are part of the solution, and will basically render them in here for us to be able to configure those. Once in the screen, we're going to need to select which environment we want to configure the deployment settings for. These environments here will basically be the ones configured within your solution profile. You're going to be able to configure 4 things as part of this process, which are the connection references, environment variables, the app sharing, and the component ownership. Within the connection references, you will be able to configure, again, which connection reference you want to use for the different connections that you have. You can choose from existing ones in the environment, or you can...
All right. So there's a bunch of things you can do there. And I'm just in the interest of time, we won't show that whole video. I've got links to both those videos, by the way, in the resource notes, so feel free to peruse them at your leisure, and a bunch of other things as well. One of the key things I want to talk, two key things I want to talk about with the ALM Accelerator. The first one is, it is completely open source, and it is a set of guidelines, essentially. It's a set of tools, including that application that you've seen there, as well as a bunch of pipelines that allow you to run in Azure DevOps. It's actually a very nice implementation of Azure DevOps pipelines with templates. So each solution that you create has its own pipeline for doing deployment and so on, but that pipeline is tiny. It's just enough to basically define what the solution name is and what the branch is. And the rest of it goes off to these boilerplate templates that we maintain to do all the work around exporting your solution, expanding it, putting it into Git, kicking off a pull request, re-importing the solution, so repacking the solution, re-importing the solution and deploying it, either managed or unmanaged, to the appropriate environment. So all of that stuff happens as part of the pipelines that we ship as part of that tool, which again is an open source set of guidelines that you can use out of the box as it is, or you can take and customize and make your own. And in fact, we've got a couple of customers who are taking some things that this tool doesn't yet do around things like portals and PCF controls and enhancing it to do exactly that. So this is one way of doing some really interesting work around this, around enabling makers. The other thing I wanted to point out, other than the fact that it was a back end to onto Azure DevOps and so on, was that it really is a great example of a Power Platform tool that's been written by a set of professional developers to do quite a complex task in a way that would be perhaps less straightforward to do in a traditional development environment. Because it's doing all this stuff around Power Platform anyway, it's already got connections into that part of the tool. So using the right tool for the job is a really interesting way of doing things. So definitely worth checking the Advanced Accelerator for Power Platform. Accelerator for Power Platform. So there's a couple of things I want you to go away with. The first one is that if you think about low code as part of your environment, think about exposing your amazing dev work as a professional developer to the entire business, giving you the opportunity to really expand your data estate, find out what people really want to do, and reduce the number of under-the-desk shadow IT implementations that you have to eventually rescue and either destroy or save. All of the resources we've got from today are at this AKA link. This is the only link you need for this session, including a link to that Reddit, that subreddit if you need it, by the way. aka.ms/englowcode. If you need to take a photo or whatever it is, that's where it is. And I've got about 5 minutes for questions. Anyone got any questions about what we talked about today?
In that ALM accelerator, the repos are in Azure DevOps?
Yes, that particular one, they're in Azure DevOps. There's also an option to do one with GitHub Actions. We haven't published that stuff yet. With the GitHub Actions one is an earlier version that only is for makers, not for both makers and advanced makers. But yes, there's an example of doing it with GitHub as well. Is that your question?
Yeah, and is that ALM accelerator, is there any licensing cost associated?
No, that's completely free. It's open source. It's available on GitHub. There's a link to it in the resource file I showed you before. It's part of a much larger thing called the Center of Excellence Starter Kit for Power Platform, which has a heap of great resources in it around governance, around themes and components, and a number of other things as part of that process, being able to manage environments and all sorts of things. But the ALM Accelerator component of it is the bit that I love talking about as a professional developer. The rest of it's sort of more of a governance and IT, as well as some additional capabilities for end users. But that ALM Accelerator piece is really cool.
I have one more.
Yeah.
So there's one limitation in Power Apps with respect to versioning, that you can't get a version beyond 6 months before that was created. So if we use GitHubs for storing your Power App source control as a source control, will that overcome that limitation? And will the versions live just within the source control?
Yeah, so when you check stuff into source, it's exactly the same as checking into source code anywhere. And if you wanted to restore something from 12 months ago, then you could just go back to a particular commit or a particular tag or a particular branch, depending on how you've got your repo set up, and just pull it out and do an export, basically, essentially, your pipeline would do a pack solution pack and a pack solution import, and there it would be. So yes, it's a great way of doing that. And it means you have that entire thing. And then the important thing about this is that your source of truth is now the source, the repo, not whatever's in the environments. You can always reproduce what's in the environments by coming back out of the repo. And I really like that as a professional developer as well. Yeah. Any other questions?
I was hoping to just touch on testing a little bit.
Yes. I don't know if you noticed that I had testing like this in my... That's a great question. Have you got a specific question, or do you want me to ramble a bit?
It's a bit general, but I was curious about, particularly from the maker's perspective, what kind of testing do you do on, well, does the organization do on the output of the makers? And also a little bit curious about whether they actually engage in any kind of automated testing.
That is an awesome question. So there's a couple of things around testing. There are a number of testing tools for apps. So App Studio, and there's a couple of app testing tools. Other components in Power Platform are less well served at the moment, let's put it that way, for testing. Things like Power Automate is quite difficult to test because if you wanted, so you can do integration testing with it, but things that trigger Power Automate flows are things like putting a file in a repository or adding a record to a database, and there's no way of mocking that trigger. So you've actually got to do the action, so you can't do it in a sort of a compact unit test kind of way. The other thing about these, about the Power components, Power Apps and Power Automate components particularly, is the connectors themselves can't be mocked. There's no easy way of doing that. Although, again, watch this space. There's a few things that we're thinking about around how that might work for testing. Automation of testing is a tough one at the moment, and I think we're not there yet. We're getting there. We're doing lots of work on it. There's a team in the Power Platform organisation which are all about what they call getting to green on ALM, and testing is one of their huge parts. And our team has been doing a bunch of work on working out what the gaps are in the testing process. There's some really interesting work going on. It's not ready yet. Yeah, but a great question, and that's why I kind of put it in brackets, and I'm glad you picked it up. Thank you. Others? All right. Well, folks, remember these are the things that I'd love you to take away. Think about engineering no code first. Expose your awesome work for use by the whole business. Make sure that you take advantage of their data estate and expose it to your users and get them to enhance it for you. Find out what actually is going to work and reduce your debt. Thank you very much.